On going back, I spent part of my last weekend going back to a house and garden which I hadn't seen for 40, 50, nearly 50 years. It was it is in the village of Grantchester, just near Cambridge, and it was the house to which my wife and I moved when we first settled down in Cambridge with our children and lived there for 2 years. Large bungalow with nice grounds just beside the famous church where the clock struck at 10 to 3 and is there, honey, still for tea. And it was a very busy, quite pressurized time, but one which I remember with great fondness. This was encouraged by watching films also of our time in that house and the children dressing up and skating on a little ice rink they'd made and going off to collect carrots on their bicycles, and all the memories flooded back watching that film. And I'd put off, I suppose, going back or not been interested, partly because the danger of going back is well known. The obvious fact is that time will have elapsed, other people will have come, new developments will have occurred, and the place will no longer be what you remember. A famous description of this is in George Orwell's Coming Up for Air, where the hero goes back to his childhood haunts and finds it all. The pond with the carp is concreted over and a rubbish dump, and nothing is recognisable. It's a great and sad book, which I remember enjoying reading. And so we are exhorted not to try to return. In a well-known catchy song, we said we wouldn't look back when again in that case they were leaving university, salad days. And that has been my experience. I've been back to a number of my childhood homes in Dorset and the Lake District and elsewhere, and they are changed. They're usually changed in two ways. One is they're physically changed. There's new buildings, or the garden is different and so on. But that's really not the great obstacle to enjoying it or getting something out of it. The society has changed. I'm not talking about the social structure or the incoming gentry or anything like that. It's just that all the links and reverberations and emotions, all those hidden tendrils going out from oneself when one was a child or an adolescent or a teenager, that's all gone. And therefore the place feels just like anywhere else. It's lost any kind of magic. And that is often a great sense of sadness, because you wanted it to somehow remain the same magical place, and yet it can't do it for you. And that's the same also with going back with people very often. I'm not one of those who goes back to school or university reunions with any consistency. Very occasionally, for one reason or another, I will go back to Oxford University for a reunion of my college or something like that. But even those occasions are often a disappointment. The people you remember as bright, lively, energetic, fairly slim young things are now portly, elderly, often rather boring and maybe disappointed older things. And there's nothing to talk about. All the subjects which burnt you up in your discussions are dead and gone, and they've often moved right away from you in their opinions and their likes and everything else. So those are something which I've also not gone back to. And yet, though going back is not something I recommend to anyone on the whole, I do it all the time. I do it in a different way, which is in my mind and imagination. And there, of course, you can construct the past as you want it to be, and you don't have to worry too much about reality. And the way I do it is as a historian does, because, of course, historians' whole craft is about going back. And so I do a history of history in general, but also of my own life. And the many volumes, 10 or more volumes I've written of autobiography of the different phases of my life are about going back in the imagination. And the great pleasure of that has been that I have discovered that the past was better than I imagined or remembered. Fears and sad memories are usually not accurate. I am able to do this because I have boxes and boxes of papers which I've never thrown away. And so it is based not on nostalgia, but on actual contemporary documents, diaries, letters, photographs. And there I can retrace, as I have from my birth through to the present, different phases of my life. And in doing that, I exorcise many ghosts, I re-encounter friends and people. Occasionally, as a result of that, I've got in touch with these people and had a short and sometimes sweet correspondence with early girlfriends and others. But that isn't the point of it. The point of it is to see how I got to where I am now, to understand myself better. So part of the task which is behind this series of what I have learnt about my life is through the process of going back. Self-examination through autobiography is very revealing in what you have learnt about your life, because you see the mistakes you made, you see the recurrent patterns of failure or success, and you learn a great deal a second time. And that going back also is something I do not just in my own life and in my own country, but around the world. We've been back to our village in Nepal 20 times, and fortunately in nearly all of them we've found many people who were there on earlier visits. It's less changing than the English landscape. We've been back to China 17 times, and that kind of going back where you reignite friendships and combining it with exploring new things is a really lovely kind of going back. So going back, if you manage it carefully, can be self-educating, can be enormous fun. On the other hand, you have to think carefully before you go back to a place that meant too much to you.